Okay, this is wiper base. I believe it's number one. I've lost track. But if you remember, if you've been watching these videos, I finally was able to get the little deluxe emblem, script emblem, goes on the side of the car. Plated, copy chromed, looking pretty good. So then I went back to work on this, and I did everything I think I was supposed to do, and I was able to get a beautiful nickel finish on it, except for those little tiny holes there that I can't seem to get filled with anything. I've cleaned them out, I've done everything I can, and this acid copper just doesn't fill them in as well as I thought it would. But I went ahead and put it in nickel, and it came out just black. So I just plated that other item and it turned out beautiful, but this turned out black. So I'm trying to think, what did I do wrong? Is there zinc in my nickel mix again? I didn't know. So I didn't want to sandblast it if it was zinc, and so I decided to try to sand it off, and not that that's much better than sandblasting. If it's zinc, it's still liable to embed it into the pot metal, but I sanded it down to mostly copper, a little bit of nickel left on it, and I flashed it, and I acid coppered it, and then I sanded it again with 600 and got it kind of shiny, put it back in nickel, and it turned out it took the nickel beautifully. I really think that I had the amperage set too high and probably burnt the nickel. I don't know what it was set at. I know I set it right the second time, and so I'm just wondering if I burnt that first coat of nickel and that's the reason it turned black. I just don't know. Anyway, the nickel went on good this time. I put it in copper chrome and it seemed to take that. However, I don't know if you can see it on here, whether it'll focus well enough or not, but where I sanded that other nickel off, I used some, I don't know, I think it was 320. Sanded it off by hand, and just like painting a car, except worse. Well, then after the 320, I did it with 600 and I knew I would get sand scratches in that copper that was left on it. So I did it with 600. I thought I had it pretty good, but it shows up terrible. If you don't have this base as shiny as you want the final product, the nickel and the chrome is not going to cover it. I mean, it's not going to hide it. So anyway, it did turn out nice except for that, and these little holes are still in it. And there's one place here you can see that bubble. That bubbled up the first time I put acid copper on it. I cleaned it down to the pot metal again and did everything over, but it's still wanting to bubble right in that spot. Is that some kind of impurity in the pot metal that's continuing to come up? I don't know. One thing I've done, I've abandoned my muriatic acid pickle, and I bought the pickle number 4 from Caswell Plating. I just set that up in this tank right here. Haven't used it yet, but I'm going to try the pickle number 4 and see if it does a better job and not quite as corrosive as the muriatic acid. So I'm getting ready to sandblast this again. Sandblast everything off of it. I'm going to try to sand it some more with my DA and see if I can get down past some of these little tiny holes. And I'll go through the whole routine again: flash copper, acid copper, nickel, copper chrome, and see if I can get a better result. I wouldn't want to put this on the car. Even though it's pretty chrome shiny, you can see all of the imperfections. It really amplifies the imperfections. Alright, so I did another flash and another acid copper, and it looks like the acid copper filled these tiny little, I mean, you can hardly see some of these holes very well, except for right there, and lo and behold, it found some pot metal that for some reason or other the flash copper didn't cover, I guess. So there we go. What do? I'm going to go ahead and sand this some and see how well the copper filled those other holes. I'll probably just sand this black spot down, try to clean it out. Hope I don't have to go too deep to where flash copper and acid copper won't fill it up. So we're going to try it and see what we can do. This is the kind of thing that happens that you don't know why. This piece, I've probably sanded on it at least a dozen times, put it into flash, and every time it looks like something different happens to it. But lately, I think you can see these little bubbles. And they are bubbles when it first comes out of the plate. Well, this one's actually been into acid copper after the flash copper. And when it first comes out and you start sanding on it, these appear. And at first I thought they were nodules that were building up. Copper, if you leave it in too long, will start building up these nodules. But if you press on these little bubbles, you'll see that they're not adhering to the base. And I've had, this has been occurring several times, so trying to figure out what's causing it to do that. And I thought at first, there's some tiny little pits in these parts. As I've explained before, they're so tiny they're like the tip of a pin, a straight pin, and you can hardly see them, just tiny little dots. I don't think it's possible to drill them all out. There's hundreds of them. So I try to sandblast them as best I can and clean them out. First I thought it was corrosion from those popping these little bubbles up. And it still might be. But I'm trying to solve this problem to what's causing this to happen. As I said, when it comes out of flash copper, it looks beautiful. You think, oh boy, got a nice, good, even covering. So I'll go ahead and put it into acid copper. And it looks like it plates acid. Even though my acid copper never puts on the amount that I think it ought to put on. It's not putting on much more thickness than flash copper. And it looks beautiful when you take it out, but when you start sanding on it, you see underneath these little bubbles that are not stuck to the pot metal substrate. So I'm working on trying to solve what's causing this. So I took this piece and with 180 in my DA sander, I sanded everything off of it that I could get off, the copper and everything. And I think I sanded down below any of the little black spots tiny little pits. One thing about this pot metal, you'll find that the more you sand on it, you can get down into more corroded area down that's embedded inside the pot metal. So it just looks like sometimes it's impossible to get all of that corrosion out. And those little tiny spots, Muggy weld is good for big holes and joining things together, but I find it's not good for the tiny little holes. I drill them and grind them out, but when you put the Muggy weld on it, it won't stay in those little holes. I've tried everything to get it to do it, and it just doesn't do it. So when you start sanding, it's going to pull it right out. So anyway, I sanded everything off with 180, then I sandblasted it, and I got to thinking, my old compressor is old, and it puts out a lot of water and even some oil. And of course, when I'm spraying, I always use one of the little screw-on filters that takes out the oil and the moisture. And I got to thinking, when I sandblast this stuff, maybe I'm blowing some oil and it's embedding it in the pot metal. So I went down and put one of those little filters on my sandblast cabinet. So this one has been ground, everything's ground off with 180, and I've sandblasted it with my new dry air sandblaster. And right now I'm waiting on my SP4 to heat up. I've been kind of leery of SP4. Looked like I was suspecting maybe this pot metal was absorbing it and keeping some of the plating from sticking. I've also been suspect of pickle 4 because I went through a spell there. Every time I put raw pot metal into the pickle, it would turn it black, and copper wouldn't stick to whatever that black was, and why it was doing it, I have no idea. It doesn't seem to be doing it now. So I'm gonna put this in SP4. I'm gonna pickle it, and I'm gonna try to put flash on it again and see how it acts. Okay, I sandblasted it. I put it in SP4, put it in pickle number 4, cleaned it off real good, put it in flash copper, and then I put it in acid copper. And I will say that I've got the most substantial looking, most even looking copper coat that I think I've ever gotten on anything. I've still got, let's see if I can get it where you can see those little bumps, roughness. And it had that in the flash copper, and I think it was one of two things. I was using a real heavy sandblast, so I started off with a real rough surface, and I may have had the current a little too high. That can cause that, but I don't believe it's bubbles in the fact that it's not sticking like it was before. I think it's just little nodules, which may be caused by too much current. Could even be trash in it, but I just filtered that flash copper wash last week, so I don't think it's that. But nevertheless, I'm sanding it. This section here has been sanded with 180, and all of that bumpy looking stuff is coming off. So I'm going to sand it down smooth, and I'm going to put it back in flash, because you never know if you've uncovered some pot metal in the sanding process. I'll put back and flash it again, and then go, and I'm going to run it at a much lower current. I'm finding that formula that they use for the calculating surface area and how much current, if I run it using that formula, I almost always have problems. It just seems to me, I've been running things now at about half of the current recommended, and I get better results. And this is some of the best rebel. Like I say, this one may have been run a little higher than half, and that may be the reason I got that rough surface. So anyway, I'm going to finish sanding it down and go back through the process of flash copper and acid copper and see how it looks. Alright, I sanded it with number 180, got all that roughness out of it. Then I went over it with 600, because that 180 leaves some pretty deep sand scratches, and so I want to smooth it out a little bit. What I use for that, by the way, is these are stick-on discs that I use in my DA sander, and when I wear them out on the DA, I bring them up here and fold them over, and that's what I use to sand this stuff with. So works pretty good. Alright, so now I'm going to clean this up and put it in SP4 and put it in pickle number 4 and put it back in flash and see how it does, and run it. And by the way, you can see on these edges where I did sand through to the pot metal on these edges. So that's the reason you got to go back in flash. You put that in acid copper like it is, and that pot metal's going to boil and turn black, and got to start all over. So that's what I'm doing. Well, I thought I had it solved, but I guess I don't. I flashed this, put it in acid copper, did that twice, sanded it, and once again these blisters come up. It looks like they look pretty good until you put it in heat, and it looks like the heat causes it to separate. So what is causing that? Now this upper left hand corner is pretty good. It's doesn't have those blisters in it. So what's the difference? I went ahead and put it in nickel. I just wanted to see what would happen. And when I put it in nickel, here again, it looks like the blisters, increased. So it looks like it's heat causes them to separate. So what I'll have to do with this now is go and sand it down again all the way down to the hot metal, sand blast it, and come back up and see. I don't know what this is. Is this SP cleaner absorbed into the pot metal? Is this number 4 pickle absorbing into the pot metal, and then when it goes into heat it's releasing and trying to evaporate, and the copper is covering it so it bubbles up? I just don't know. But this is the kind of thing you run into trying to do this pot metal, especially this old Chrysler pot metal. You think you got it solved, and you just can't get through a complete cycle. So I'll start over. Fortunately, this thing is pretty thick pot metal, so I can afford to grind on it and take it down and try again.